There is an evil that still creeps the streets of South Korea, though we may not want to think about the horrors that happen in the dark. There will be no choice but to come face to face with the frightening truth that these killers are still on the loose. Hwaseong serial murders. Better known as the Hwaseong Strangler, is an unidentified serial killer and rapist who killed over 10 women from the ages of 13 through 71 between 1986 and 1991 in Hwaseong, Gyeonggi Province. The murders are considered to be the most famous in South Korea's history and have been compared to those of the Zodiac Killer because of how brutal the bodies were from being sexually assaulted and strangled to death. Lee Wa-im was a 71-year-old mother who lived with her daughter in Hwaseong, Gyeonggi-do. On September 10, 1986, Lee went to sell vegetables that she grew herself into the city of Suwon. She was never seen alive again. Later that day, she didn't return home, and her daughter had reported her missing. 5 days later, on September 15th at around 6:20 a.m., Lee's body was found among the rice fields only 30 minutes away from her home. She was bound by her own clothing, sexually assaulted, and strangled to death. Little did the police know that this would be the first among many killings by an unknown serial killer who terrorizes South Korea for many years, from 1986 to 1991. The next murder happened on October 20th, 1986, around 2 p.m., when the body of Park Hyun-sook, 25 years old. She was visiting a village near a marriage counseling center, and she was found in a farm of Hwanseng, Gyeonggi-do. The farm was only 4 centimeters away from the first crime, and just like the first victim, Park was raped and strangled using her own clothes. It wasn't until the third murder that police began to suspect that a serial killer was on the loose. On December 12, 1986, Kwon Jung-boon, 25 years old, was raped and killed in the exact same way as the last victims on her way to work. 2 days later, a body of the fourth victim, Lee Kai-sook, 23 years old, was found in a rice field. Although the women had been killed in a span of 2 months, police had no leads to go off of. By the next year, the body of Hong Jin-young, 19 years old, and Park Eun-jun, 29 years old, both women had been raped and strangled. The next few murders happened in a span of 2 years. All the police had to go on was a few witness statements that the killer was dressed in black clothing of various types and wore a hood and black baseball cap. The Hwang Se-young killer's usual pattern of attacks were targeting to Korean women and girls, where he would strike when they were walking alone in secluded areas, rape them, or kill them via manual strangulation. The only description the police had to work with came from the killer's would-be fourth victim, who was raped but survived. She described the killer as a slim man who was in his early 20s, weighing about 75 kilograms and about 5'4" to 5'6". Until it was lifted in July of 2015 by the National Assembly, the statute of limitations for murder in South Korea was only 15 years. The statute for the killings expired on April 2, 2006. However, police records were still kept due to the significance of this case. With the statute's lifting, cold cases have been revisited, and hopefully someday, the Hwaseong serial killer will be caught. The search for young Sook-yeon's killer. Sun Hoo-jung and her husband Young Sook-yeon were born in South Korea, but did not meet until after he arrived in the United States with just $300 in his pocket. Jung described her husband to be wonderful and very handsome. She said they first fell in love and then saved enough money to buy a car wash. Their Dr. Car Wash on Route 15 in Fairfax County turned into the American dream they so longed for until everything went wrong 6 years ago. Detective Connie Moore said that Jung was supposed to be home on October 7, 2010, not her husband. When his friends canceled their regular golf game, she went to the store and he stayed home. It's possible that whoever went there that day didn't expect him to be home. They were surprised. That's why they used weapons that were inside the house. There were 2 kitchen knives used to stab Young, more than a dozen times. Detectives say it was used in such a way with a lot of anger or some kind of emotion that would give them that much strength to be able to break the handle off the knife in the middle of the fight. Yun was a black belt who fought for his life. It was shown that he was hitting back so hard he broke bones in both of his hands. Detectives wonder what made these vertical marks on both his neck and head, and these unusual T-shaped puncture wounds you can see in this newly released police sketch. The dynamic of the injuries made it look like it was possible that there were more than one person attacking him. Then there were these two bloody sock prints found next to Yun's body. Jung explained when you entered somebody's house, you automatically take your shoes off. That led detectives assuming it was a cultural aspect, thinking that the killers were familiar with the victim. The sock prints at first began to lead to nowhere until police sprayed a chemical called luminol onto the garage floor, reacting to trace amount of invisible blood. Blue sock prints lit up the floor, leading police up the steps and straight to a secret hiding place where Yun and Jun hid a large amount of cash, stolen along with their SUV. The SUV reappeared 4 days later about 10 miles away on Americana Drive in Arundel. Detective Morris said this is the only case in her entire career she hasn't been able to solve. It wouldn't be until later that Jung was approached by another detective who swindled her out of $300,000, claiming that he had a witness but never revealed who it was. This didn't help her get any closer to finding who killed her husband. The Frog Boys. This story begins on March 26, 1991, in the west of Daegu, Korea. Much of the area had the day off due to local elections. With that in mind, some of the local boys got up early and began playing before the day could start. The gang stood 6 strong and ranged in ages from 9 to 13. All of the boys attended Seongseo Elementary School. The children decided to get ready and head up the mountain to search for salamander eggs. Many other locals would go on to see them as they peered through their windows or heard them while they were in their backyards around the time of their departure. Hours would go by and not a word from the boys. Their parents were understandably worried and began searching for the kids once the sun began to set. After searching on their own for a few hours, the parents decided to call the police, who performed a more thorough search. The search would go on until early the next morning. The boys disappeared without a trace. Police initially suspected the boys to be runaways, but was soon dismissed. The case quickly picked up momentum and reached the president, who enlisted hundreds of thousands of police and military to aid in the search, but this led nowhere. The only truly intriguing tip was by a man who claimed responsibility for the crime. He had claimed to have abducted the children and that they were alive but not well. He was hoping to con the families out of money, but he was soon discovered to be a fraud. September 26, 2002. A man was taking a solitary hike, scavenging for acorns, along the scenic mountainside. His bag of acorns dropped and he noticed something in the distance and stumbles upon something horrific in the shallow pit. An assortment of small human-like bones, and scattered throughout the bones were various pieces of children's clothing. The bones found when the bodies were discovered, investigators initially claimed that the boys had died of hypothermia. Many who followed the case refused to believe this. After the second investigation, it was concluded that the boys had indeed been murdered, many of whom suffered severe head injuries either from blunt force trauma or from shotgun. One of the child's skulls had 2 bullet holes in it. The others had markings from an unknown tool etched in the various parts of their skulls. Experts also believe that the tool used to bludgeon the children were tied to the killer's profession. Boys' clothes had been tied together using strange knots that led authorities to believe that the killer was somehow involved in an industrial setting. Despite some evidence being discovered at the scene, heavy criticism fell upon the police for not maintaining the area properly. Others believe that it was a tragic accident, but some followed quickly, saying it was an elaborate military cover-up due to the firing range being so close in proximity to the shallow grave, believing one or multiple children were injured by a stray bullet, and to ensure the word didn't get out, the perpetrator decided to kill the rest of the kids. Another theory, that it was the father of one of the murdered boys, was the culprit, but this was widely dismissed by authorities on the public, but no evidence has ever been found to link any of the parents to the murder of these children. Yoo Young-cho. Born in April 18, 1970, he's a South Korean serial killer and self-confessed cannibal. He admitted to murdering 21 people, mostly prostitutes and wealthy old men. Born to poor parents and brought up by his mother after his father died when he was 14, Yu's mom said he was a quiet boy and kept to himself. But when he turned 14, his aunt had passed from a heart attack. He was devastated. When she was cremated and was being transferred into the urn, his father caught him putting one of the bones in his mouth. On November 18, 2003, firefighters were called to a house that was on fire in a wealthy district of Seoul, Korea, and found the bodies of 3 elderlies. It appeared that they had their heads bashed in by a hammer, but police disagree and saying it was caused by falling debris. On March 5, 2003, he met a full-time student, part-time escort, Sun Jin-hee, where he took her back to his apartment where he proceeded to rape her, kill her, then eat her. Police found her body wrapped in plastic and used freezer. Starting in March 2004, Yu called prostitutes to his residence in western Seoul and bludgeoned them after having sex with them. His 4 next victims were dismembered and mutilated after having ate them. Each of his victims were always missing their livers. When he was finally caught and arrested in July 15, 2004, he explained his motives in front of a TV camera saying, "Women shouldn't be sluts, and the rich should know what they have done." During interrogation, Yu's eventually confessed to killing 26 individuals on July 19, 2004, several days after his arrest, but no details were given. Although he's been caught, police have a lot of unsolved questions when it comes to finding where the rest of his victims are buried. South Korea named him Hannibal Lecter. Prosecutors requested the death penalty, which Yu thanked them for, and Yu was sentenced to death on 13 December 2004 for 26 counts of known murder. Tsuya Kim. Tsuya Kim and her husband, Soo Young, were married and moved to the United States from Korea. By 1991, they both lived in New York with their 2 sons and owned 2 successful stores. However, their happy life was ruined on June 29th. Tsuya dropped her 2 sons off at their grandmother's house and went shopping. When her husband came home later, she had not returned, and he later found her car parked in the parking garage with the engine still cold. The next day, police identified the remains of a young woman who was Tsuya's. She had been murdered by 9 stab wounds from an unknown man, her remains coldly dumped in a trash dumpster. Police determined that she had been the victim of a random violence, and they were able to find a witness. Before her body was found, a security guard witnessed an unidentified man early in the morning acting strangely around the garbage can that was later found to have contained Tsuya's remains. When the man left, the security guard began looking through the garbage and found her body. He tried hailing a passing ambulance, but Tsuya had been dead for several hours. The security guard gave a description of the man and the license plate, which was later found to belong to a Taiwanese college student who had nothing to do with the case. Police began looking at the security guard as a suspect, until a lie detector test proved that he had nothing to do with the murder either. For nearly 2 years, Tsuya Kim stayed to the United States, but the memories of his wife proved too painful to bear. In April of 1993, he shut down his businesses and returned with his 2 little boys to South Korea. His wife's killer's identity still remains a mystery. Be careful next time you walk the streets at night. You never know which killer will come out of retirement. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.
Why?